So we're here now. One, two, three, going. We're recording. Um, good afternoon. Good part of day, everyone. Thank you for joining today. This is a large-scale Scrum of New York City meetup, and we have been experimenting lately with virtual events that have been very successful. Today, our special guest is, I would like to refer to as my friend and colleague, Tsvi Gal, who is the very accomplished technology business leader and the winner of Einstein Award for Technology Excellence. Tsvi has served a variety of companies, fintech, publishing firms, as a CTO and CIO for a number of years. Not just to mention a few: Morgan Stanley, Bridgewater Associates, Deutsche Bank, um, Warner Music Group. So today, Tsvi will be sharing with us some of his most recent experiences in enterprise and technology and around agile and DevOps transformation that he has been involved with for the last couple of years. That's how Tsvi and I got to know each other. We unfortunately never worked together, but we have collaborated and networked a lot and have exchanged many thoughts, which makes me very proud as well. So without any further ado, I will pass this on to Tsvi. I don't believe there will be any slides shared. It will be mostly a narrative, a story that Tsvi will be telling us, and he is willing to take lots of questions towards the end. He'll pace himself in terms of how he budgets his time. And I have a few questions off the cuff that I was able to collect from the audience. Okay, and feel free to copy paste more questions in the chat window. I'll take them from there, and I will present them to Tsvi in the order they will be received. Okay, Tsvi, on to you.
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Gene. And hello to everybody. So yeah, as Gene suggested, rather than go through a slideshow or PowerPoint or anything else that is totally boring, I thought I will tell the story of agile and DevOps at Morgan Stanley and other places, but mostly in large enterprises. And again, I will talk a little bit, and then I will open it up to as many questions as you would like to ask. I'll do my very best to answer them. Whichever I cannot answer, I will say so. So I will not avoid it. I will just say, sorry, I cannot answer, either because I don't know or because I'm not allowed to. Mostly it's going to be because I don't know. So let's start. So normally when you look at anything, any change in technology or culture, etc., the first question to ask is why. Why is there a change? Now there could be a variety of reasons. Everything could be from as prosaic as the CEO went golfing with some smart consultant, and on par 17 he just heard that guess what, there is this wonderful new thing that will make you extremely productive and will save a lot of money. So that's one of the reasons that people get into this. Another one would be not as similar. Someone from the board was taking a very long flight, got bored, read a magazine, and suddenly found that there is something out there that really can solve all the problems in the world, all the way to real issues, which is you have some things that you need to change because of either business reasons or others that actually require a change. So I'll start with the change in Morgan Stanley came from actually an interesting place. Last year and the year before, last year was the second best year in the firm's history from revenue, profit, etc. The year before was the best one in the history of the firm. So in a way, the company is doing extremely well. Now with this come a lot of expectations. Our clients now expect only excellence. Our traders, our bankers would like to, take advantage of, of the good time and expand into other areas and now there are a lot of features and functions and new things that they want to do. Now, the IT in Morgan Stanley is pretty large. We're talking about 20,000 old people in technology, so that's a big number. We looked at the body of work and the set of user stories that came from the business in 2017. We started 18 when we actually started to really move on it. And if we were to really satisfy each and every requirement, we would have to hire another 8,000 to 9,000 people in development just to do that. That seemed to be unsustainable for several reasons, one of which is we don't want to be so big. We are not a technology company. The second one was more physical. We don't have enough space in New York, and most of the people that we could find that had the right expertise were New York or London and the metropolitan areas. Now, we have presence all over the world. The technology in Morgan Stanley, the major hubs are New York. I'll go kind of geographically. New York, Montreal, Glasgow, London, Budapest, Mumbai, Bangalore, Shanghai, Hong Kong, Sydney, and Tokyo. But again, with a very large concentration in the big metropolitan ones, and less so in the India area, which was traditionally done or kept for either maintenance or for testing. And I'm going to get into testing and then change there later on. So the biggest reason was, okay, this growth is not sustainable. We cannot grow that much. We need to find other ways to improve the productivity of the people in the firm that does not include just throwing people at the issue. So the idea was that in many areas, if we adopt agile development, we could achieve this increase in productivity. In addition, which will come with no surprise, in many times when we did the more traditional waterfall type of development, and we're going to get to DevOps a little later on, the level of satisfaction from our clients was okay. And many times we actually, because we know what they're doing, we kind of hit in the right place. Many times we missed it because the original requirements, even if they were actually accurate, let's say we did a fantastic job with business analysis and we interviewed our clients and we understood exactly what they want, and then we went to develop it. By the time we were done, the world has changed. Either the requirements that were number one priority at the time became number 3, 4, 5, and now there are other new ones, or other things that have changed. The market changed, and so on. So there was a lot of gaps in that way. So just summarizing this part, so the original intent was to improve the productivity and to end the satisfaction, because we just had a tremendous backlog that we had to satisfy. Now, as you can imagine, quite a few people understood what this is about, and many did not. So there are a lot of misconceptions about agile and especially on DevOps, as we get to it later on. The first one, of course, was the belief that everything needs to be agile, and which means that everything we do in technology and in the business needs to adopt agile, methodology and philosophy. This is something that I had to fight very early on, because that's not the case. And I try to give several examples where agile, especially Scrum, because Kanban could work in some of those areas, but especially Scrum is not a fit for every situation. I had a discussion with the head of our tech and ops and some of the other folks there, and I tried to bring some of those examples to bear. So I used one of them, which is, let's say you are in the help desk and you answer a severity 1 or whatever problem. Well, what you want this person to do is go and solve this problem. You don't want him to start to plan a sprint over several weeks, 2 weeks, and create a group and do all of this. If you know how to solve it, just solve it. But this problem was very hard to explain because there are other mechanisms and you can still do solve it. So the other one was that we were in the midst of a cyber attack. And of course, the natural thing to do was to pick up the phone, call the hacker and say, do you mind waiting for 2 weeks? We're in the middle of a sprint. Normally, we did not get good response for that. So the point was, and those were just anecdotes, but the point was that Agile is not for everything. So what is it for? It is really for the areas where we really need to work more closely with the business, be in a very joint type of project, joint responsibility, and the leadership of and the product ownership we gave to the business, and we were trying to really move into this level of changing the way we work so we can achieve the productivity gains that we were looking for. And again, I'm not going to dwell too much about the different techniques. So we use, of course, a combination of Scrum for the more pure application development, business development, where it made sense. We used Kanban for more operational and more short-term type of activities, or let's say when the teams were smaller, let's say we had a team of 2 people or one or two people, then it didn't make sense to do the other way. But by and large, this was the direction. So, okay, and what about DevOps? So similar misconception there as well. The belief that DevOps will provide, cure for cancer, solve world hunger, and bring peace to the Middle East were the 3 things that we had to fight against. And by the way, this order is probably going to be the order it will be resolved, peace in the Middle East being the last one. But the idea was that people started to look at DevOps and made the natural mistakes to believe that, okay, DevOps is basically you put the developers and operating people in the same place, and now they talk to each other and they become one team, and we don't need to worry about anything else. Okay, that's fine, but that's what did you do? You just changed the seats of people. That did not change the culture itself. So working a lot on defining, the idea of DevOps, the continuum from the moment that you publish the software all the way to production, and then in production, when you do the measurement and monitoring, etc., was something that was something we had to go through with the inclusion of the CI/CD and the rest of it. And I remember in one of the town halls, one of the questions that was brought up was, can you explain to me the exact role of a tester in the world of Agile and DevOps? And I said, oh, that's actually a very easy question, because the answer is there is no role for a tester. There is no such thing as a tester anymore. Now, people misread it as, oh my God, we're not doing testing anymore. No, guys, we are doing testing. We're going to automate the testing, and we're going to basically let the squads create the automation part of it. But we are not going to have testers as such. One of the things that we struggled with in the get-go was, again, this separation between Agile and DevOps as 2 different disciplines. When it was quite understood for the development teams that they need to do Agile, and it was quite understood by the operational teams that DevOps is important, and then therefore the automation and the scripts, etc. And later on, we're going to add DevSecOps to the point. The fact that they're actually one thing was something that took a little while to get into people's mentality. One of the things that we did to enable it or to help it is that we insisted that in each and every squad there is one person that is assigned as a DevOps champion, and his or her role specifically was to understand the tool chain, understand the methodology, and make sure that the squad is considering and using it from the start and not as an after effect. And this actually helped a lot, because the early pilots we did, which were mostly Agile, when we came down into the DevOps side and the automation side, it was afterthought, and now, oh my God, now we need to go back and do it again. So you know what? Let's continue the way we do it today. We're going to finish our development and in the iterations, and the testers will be involved, but we're not going to change the way we do business. So the introduction of the DevOps champions early on really helped in this regard. So now going back to the story. So in a way, what we did was of course, like everybody else, we cheated, which means we started with 9 pilots initially, and we chose the areas where we knew that we would be successful. So we chose the ones, the environments or the projects that were really classically fit for the experiment. And of course they went well. But then we told people, folks, don't generalize that everything else will be simple or easy. We cheated. We knew what we were doing. We wanted to show that it's doable. We wanted to get the enthusiasm going, but now the hard part starts. So as in all places, the introduction of methodologies or technologies was relatively simple. On the CI/CD side, once people started or got used to use, Jenkins and Jira and the rest of them, that was fine. The tools were there. And what we decided in the get-go to do is to try to standardize as much as possible on the tools that are really important, and then let free hand and people choose whichever are the right tools and others. So, for example, in the early discussions between Jenkins and TeamCity, because about 75% of the development was done in Linux and open source, said, you know what, we're going to go with Jenkins, live with it. So on and so forth, so we use Jira and so on. But in testing, for example, if you prefer to use, Bitbucket, if it makes sense for you, or Cucumber, whatever is the right one, then by all means do that. So we created the tool chain. We created the champions within each and every squad. We also had a small group in the center, which was responsible for assisting in the onboarding, which means those are the people that knew the tool chain in and out extremely well, and they were available to the different squads and teams to help them understand and implement them in the beginning. So they worked with the champions, they worked with the teams, and really made sure that things were working. But as the change is going, then some of the operating models evolved and changed as well. Clearly, the separate group called QA started to erode. We took people from this group, we taught them how to automate, how to and go beyond writing scripts, but really automate the entire process and embedded them within the squads. This was a change. We decided to take note and learn from others, but not copy them. So we looked at the Spotify model, and we took some of the things that were there and that made sense, but we did not adopt it as a whole because it just didn't scale, or we thought it didn't scale for us as such. And so those are some of the other things that we tried to do there. So we basically created a center of excellence that had several parts of it. The first one was the operating model, the one that looks at the way we organize today, which is again traditionally hierarchical type of typical IT organization, and try to switch it to a more dynamic squads and fleets level. By the way, fleet is our name for a tribe due to politically correctness and sensitivity in this area, but it's the same thing. When you hear tribe, you hear fleet, we mean the same thing. We also adopted chapters as such and guilds, which of course are less formal, but we did not take just the dogma. We basically, in many of the teams, things were kind of in transition. Some were moving into this direction, some were more the way they were before. And we separated the program into 2 parts, one which is Agile at Scale, which was the more formal program. And so that's part of, and the other part was the grassroots. So the operating model team was the ones that were looking at the way we can operate in a new world. So what are the relationship between the different squads and the fleets? How do the fleets work with each other? What is the difference between a technical area lead and a chapter lead? The creation of all of those roles and the adoption into the firm was the role of the operating model group. The next group was the training group, and they of course provided training to all the people that were involved in different levels, and there were different types of training and so on and so forth. Coaching was another thing that was provided initially from the center into the different groups. And then we started with external coaches that we hired, but then we took many of the people we have, and we led them through a very rapid and intensive coaching set of classes, and then we made them shadows to the other ones. Well, you can imagine the process there. The third group that is involved there was the group that was involved in the creation of and maintenance of the DevOps toolchain and the promotion of DevOps as such. This was another group which was now part of the same effort, which was very important. And the fourth one was the adoption team, which I mentioned some of it before, the people that were basically going with the different teams and help them move forward. So that's some of the baseline that we put together in place. Some things worked well, some things did not work well, as you can imagine. We were positively surprised by the enthusiasm of the community to adopt both, especially Agile, later on also DevOps. We were afraid that the reaction would be hitting the head and say, oh my God, yet another initiative coming from the center, please leave us alone, let us do what we want and continue with life. No, we were surprised. People were interested, wanted to learn, wanted to be involved. And in fact, by the end of last year, the number of people that were involved in the grassroots effort were about twice the number of people that were involved in the more formal Agile at scale. So people were really enthusiastic about trying it, moving with it, and give it a try. So that actually was quite successful. Where we failed actually was in the attempt to really understand and move the culture to really behave in kind of interrelated squads within fleets, and how the fleets react to each other, because people by nature kind of gravitated back to the old departments because they felt more comfortable. I know what my boss is. I know who's telling me what to do. More importantly, I know who writes my annual appraisal, and therefore determines how am I paid. So people gravitated towards that rather than believe in the new process as such. So we had several starts that we had to do that, and people were starting to move there. And this is not, by no means, it's not, the journey is not complete, and we cannot declare success and such. This is something that will take some time, because people by nature are, let me just shut this off. People by nature are creatures of habits. I'm used to a certain thing, that's the way I do it, that's what I feel like continuing to do. So that was one of the areas that was not that successful. The other one was that the co-location idea, which makes a lot of sense, was totally impractical in an organization which is so spread out like we are. And it took a lot of efforts to try to really make it work in an environment when you have part of the team in New York, part of it is in somewhere in India, Bangalore, Mumbai, some of the team is in Sydney. And it's very hard, especially due to the time difference. It's very hard to do any serious sprints when you are spread that far. And we were not ready. We were not at a position that we could actually divide the work and create the squads more locally. That was the ideal, which was, in other words, if there is a great team on subject A in Bangalore, let them have the full responsibility and don't get them interact with the people in Glasgow, etc. So that's actually something that it's very hard, and it's another one that is not working that well. Later on, when there were several questions about the appraisal system and how do you get recognized and how do you get promoted, and also the roles of team leads and others, which I'll be able to answer more in the Q&A part of it. So we are about 25 minutes after the start. I think I will stop here and open it to any questions that Jen, you collected from the team.
Sure, Tzvi, thank you. So that's good timing. So it's 25 past. We got plenty of time. So folks, I have a few questions that were pinged to me privately. A few are really pressing, so I'm gonna use my veto if I need to throw them at Tsvi. But at the moment, I would like to open the floor, and if you have any questions, please unmute yourselves and state a question to Tsvi. Perhaps he can answer. So the floor is yours. If there are any questions, please ask now.
Good evening. Can you hear me?
Yes, Igor. Yes.
Yeah. Hello, guys. So I just want to ask a question. How is it possible to implement, let's say, less in in outsourced organizations who have a lot of projects and they're dependent on clients? So my question is it possible to, and if yes, how should we start to do this if we're talking about our big outsourced company?
Okay, so the connection wasn't so good, but I think I got the question, which is how do you do it in an outsourced environment, right? That was the question?
Yeah, I think there was a mentioning of less as in large scale Scrum, Igor. If that was the case, then I don't think Tsvi mentioned that. It wasn't the framework that his experience was referring to. So everything else in the question is probably valid, but not the fact that but there was no mentioning of large scale Scrum. There was no mention of less.
Yeah. No, there was again we can go into more details because we experimented both with less and we tried safe. We have some opinions. Jim and I exchanged quite a few emotional opinions on those two. But but let me go back to the question of outsourcing, which is a real question. So first of all, we are not that much outsourced at Morgan. We have when I say India, it's mostly our captive team in India rather than outsourced. Now, this being said, even if it's outsourced, it really doesn't matter. At the end of the day, it depends how the interaction between the different teams work. And we found out that many of the outsourced giants are also adopting agile as such, and therefore it was more of the question of how does it fit within the fleets rather than whether the team itself was paid by Morgan Stanley or paid by XYZ was less important, as long as they follow the same methodology. And we basically made sure that all the the methodology books and trainings that we did internally, we provided also to the companies that we work with, and they again, with small variations, they try to follow the same. So I'm not sure if it answered the question, but I tried.
That's up to Igor. If that was the question.
Yeah. So thank you for answering this question. Yeah, I think it's really maybe too big topic to be discussed for just a question, but maybe it might be a good topic for the future webinars, because it's a really big one. So for me, at the beginning, it's okay to have this answer.
Thank you, Igor. Anyone else, folks? I am copying some of the questions from the chat room. If there's no one else, I'll just present them to Tsvi.
Yes, this is Samir. I wanted to know from, thank you, Gene, for putting this together. The question that I have is for Tsvi. What was done to move the culture into interrelated work, since the people naturally gravitate towards old model of working?
Yes. So again, culture is as I said, it's a difficult thing to change. Technology is much easier to change. I think that the things we try to do is to really empower the squads themselves and the fleets and the fleet leads to be the ones that actually really have the major say, both in the direction of the groups, the development, what to do, the priority list, all of those things, as well as when we had some issues with people that were not a fit in the group and so on and so forth. If the squad, let's say, decided that John Doe was not a good fit, and they came back and said, listen, we think that Joe does not carry the weight that he does, rather than say, you know, it's not your business, let the manager make those decisions, we listened. We said, okay, you know what, maybe that's the right thing. So the idea was to take it seriously and make sure that when the squad leads and the fleet leads and later on the chapter leads, when they actually had a statement and they made it on behalf of their teams and so on and so forth, that it was really listened to and adhered to as much as possible. And after you do it enough time, people start to believe that you actually mean it, that you're actually really going to empower the teams to do and act as such, rather than have this backroom, you know, management that actually runs the gamut, and those are just in the front. So the more you give, the more responsibility, the more authority you give to the teams, the more people believe that they actually have, you know, this power in their hands, and the more they feel that way, then the more responsibilities they take on it. Because it goes two ways. On one hand, it is, you know, you're bothered by the fact that as a team member you don't have much power, but on the other hand, it's actually pretty convenient because you don't need to make tough decisions. And we were saying it comes as a package. If you want to have more authority, you need to make some tough decisions. And guess what? Those are the things that you need to decide. You as a team, go and make a decision. And slowly but surely, they started to get into this and start to believe that this actually works. One of the other things that we did in kind of in parallel, which actually realistically had nothing to do with it, but turned out to help, that we started about a year and a half ago a program called Distinguished Engineers and Fellows. So it's Technical Fellow and Distinguished Engineer, which really rewarded the top technologists in the firm, both with recognition, but also with the right pay. They're being paid as MDs, which is the highest pay you can get in technology, so on and so forth. But as either not by design, but by natural gravitation, those people started to become leaders of their own teams and other environments. They started to be listened to more and more. And so if there was a discussion and one of the, let's say, distinguished engineers had a say and stated something in a certain way, he or she were listened to by the team and by others with much more respect. And as such, the power really went back to the teams rather than stay in the back rooms.
Okay.
But
Thank you very much.
Journey.
It's the folks. There's a few questions that came that were tangential relevant to what Samir has posed and what Tsvi mentioned before. So it kind of revolves around culture. So I'm going to third at this point at Tsvi. Anyway, so someone asked privately. There was, you know, apparently someone works for also for the financial firm, and they have leveraged. So I guess at the recommendation of another consulting firm, a Spotify model. They also did not take it verbatim. They did not just copy paste it, but they try to do something with it internally by molding it to existing needs. However, what they ended up with was almost like relabeling existing organizational structures into Spotify likes, you know, squads, tribes of tribes, chapters, chapters of chapters. So effectively, it was relabeling of existing organizational power structures into horizontal structures. Now, nothing really has changed. The culture did not change, and of course, has created a lot of tension and frustration. What are your experiments and experiences with that? Was it done anyhow differently?
Sure.
We'll watch.
No, that's actually a very good point, because one of my earliest fear, and again, Jin and I talked about it like I don't know, 2 years ago, was from something called agile washing, which is basically take the terminology of agile and retrofit it to an existing organization. Therefore, you don't need to do much besides just relabeling. So I'll give you some examples. So we used to have requirements, we just call them now user stories, and that's fine, we are done. We used to have project meetings, now we call them standout, and that's good. We used to have a project manager, now we have Scrum Masters or something alike. We used to have team leaders, now we have squad leaders, so nothing changes there. In terms of chapter leads, we used to have department managers, now we call them chapter leads. Basically relabel everything, and guess what? Hey, after 1 day of thinking, I'm agile, I'm done, everything is good. Of course, the problem with this is that if you don't change the way you work, then nothing changed. You just change the names. So we had a very early fear of this, and we actually had several instances of teams that were kind of overexcited and decided to declare themselves ready to be agile, and were not. So one of the things that we did was that before a team could even start a sprint zero, the coaches that we had, which were experienced coaches, had to go through a checklist and ensure that the team actually is ready and working as an agile team, and it's not really just renamed. And initially, for the first several months, even teams that were coached, when they decided, because it was the team decision, not the coach, the team decision to say, okay, we believe that we are ready to be called agile and get into the agile at scale. And there was an important in this, because if you are declared as agile at scale, we actually give you more resources, we give you more coaching, more training, more than anything else. So it was important to become formal. And initially, many of the teams that tried to do that failed, because they didn't do much more than just changing the labels and the names. So this was definitely a concern, but I think it was really the litmus test, if you may, that we ran through and make sure that that they conduct themselves as such. The coaches had to participate and record the meetups. They had to record the way they did the sprint. They had to basically take notes of the ways they look at the backlog and how do they prioritize, and do they actually have the business involved for real, or they just have someone from the business comes every other week, say, hi guys, everything okay, yes, good, we'll see you again. Those type of things, which we had some of those. So it was very diligent in the sense that we will not recognize you as such, as a formal effort until you pass the test. And we actually celebrated many of the failures of such to show people, you see, this group tried to do the right thing, or maybe not, but tried to do this and this, and here's why they were not approved. Because of A, B, C, and D. Next team, if you come in, don't make the same mistake, because you'll not be approved as well. So this was there was a lot of effort made into not falling into this trap, because at the end of the day, I mean, let's go back to Prime Directive. What was the goal? Why are we doing this? We want to achieve the productivity gain. We want to automate the environment. We want to make sure that our clients are satisfied and the developers are delighted. Those were the goals. And if we did not achieve it, then why do it? So if you just change the labels, you didn't improve anything. Therefore, you failed the Prime Directive. So this was very important to note and test. So my advice would be to any groups that wants to do that, is to really ensure that you test and check and make sure that the teams are doing what they're supposed to do before you recognize them as an agile team. So, pseudo-agile or semi-agile or almost agile, it's similar to, you cannot be half pregnant, you're either pregnant or not. Being just a little bit pregnant doesn't work. So, and we wanted to make sure that if you're in all the way as such. So that's a really good point about the agile washing.
I like your irony, and I'm going to write on it. There was also an expression: you cannot expedite the term by having 9 women being pregnant, right?
Absolutely, yes.
Yeah, there are a few questions. They're almost coming together to the same pressing topic, unless there is someone who is brave enough to state it live. I'm going to just club them together and pose it to Tsvi. Anyone wants to ask another question?
Before we do, I see one question that was popped up about DevOps and DevSecOps.
Well, that was, yeah, exactly. So DevOps, DevSecOps, I think people were attending also to the previous webinar last week with the U.S. Air Force chief officer, and maybe that's why the question is. And there's a relevant question, Tsvi, so I'm going to throw it at you, just club it together.
Sure.
Did you consider DevOps as a separate organizational structure, or more of a set of practices that developers on teams were expected to do? So I think the question is coming from the original native authentic definition of DevOps. So
Sure.
in that.
So let me start with the easy one, the DevOps and DevSecOps. It's one thing, okay? The adding security into DevOps basically makes it, a complete environment. For us, it meant initially basically making sure that, at the early stage when you pop up the code, we do automatic, static code analysis. At that point, when you go to the integration part, you do dynamic. When you do it runtime, you do runtime. We added those pieces into the SDLC itself, and we want to make sure that it's part of the same line of thinking. We did not think that it's a separate thing or a different thing. We have something called SecArch, which is really a process where every application or product that is being integrated into the environment needs to go through a security checklist to make sure that it's not harmful and it has all the right things in it. It's now part of the SDLC. It's not a separate part. It's not done only at the end, which used to be the case. You're done with everything. You go to SecArch. They look at all the criteria. Everything is good, great. If it's not good, go back, come back. No, now it's done throughout the process. So, for example, in the static code analysis, let's say we identify something bad, like, I don't know, a SQL ingestion, whatever it is, then we notify you and we make sure that it's being fixed. But if everything is fine, it just flows through. You'll never know that we actually did any of those things. You shouldn't care about it. And similarly with all the other gateways that SecArch put into place, in terms of the cleanness of the code, in terms of the sometimes even about the intellectual property capabilities. If you take from open software and stuff as such, all of those things are now embedded within the SDLC. So it's one effort. Switching to the second part of the question in terms of organization versus being part of the DNA. So we initially, so it's a matter of time. To begin with, we actually created a team that created or put together the tool chain as such and integrated into the organization. So there was a lot of development, a lot of integration, a lot of those things. But once the tool chain is in place, then the DevOps team as a separate team eventually will fade away. Basically, as the champions within the different squads and fleets are starting to gain more momentum, get more confidence, understand the tool chain, etc., then the need for a centralized team starts to go down. It brings up one thing that needs to be a continuum, which is, looking at new tools, replacing tools, and making them more effective. Those things still need to happen, and the way it's done is basically. There is a small, at this point in time, there's still a central team, but people that are now experts and have used DevOps for quite some time, they come with ideas, with changes, with suggestions, and now there is a team of their peers that gets together and say, you know what, right now we have those set of tools, there's something that is missing, here it is. does it make sense for us to adopt? And if people around the table believe that it should be adopted, then it is being adopted. If it is just a unique case, etc., then maybe if there is something that already exists that does something that is about the same, but you just like the way it does it better, then normally the answer would be no. So that helps in also stopping the proliferation of too many tools, which make it hard to support and make also the chain not really a chain, but really kind of a selection of different tools that actually do not talk to each other. So that's really the case. So to summarize it another way, when we started, there was a clear and identifiable reason to have a DevOps team as a separate team that provided both the creation of the tool chain, the maintenance, the enhancement, etc., but also, as I mentioned before, the onboarding, the training, and working with the champions. As time goes by, this team actually shrinks to be in size quite significantly, and the continuation of the DevOps as a discipline now becomes part of the normal life of the team.
So someone just pinged me offline, actually explicitly thanking you for being the candid and explicit about this, because, of course, maybe this needs to be unpacked more, but clear delineation between treating DevOps as a silo, organizational silo, because oftentimes they are, versus treating it as a good set of practices that teams should embrace and internalize is pretty important. So you made that pretty clear, and you made this. You described this as a transition, right? It was a gradual transition from one state onto another. Hopefully, whoever posed that question, a few people have. They're satisfied with the answer. If there is any follow-ups, please post them now. Post them now, folks. I have a few others in the queue. A few other questions in the queue. So do you have anything else verbally, more of a narrative you wanted to share, or are we in the QA mode and we can continue asking questions?
I think that we are mostly in QA mode. Again, I'm trying to explain that, again, my view is when I talk about those things, one of the reasons that I'm not a big fan of going to conferences of such is because people go there and tell of their heroic stories, and now everything worked perfectly well, and they're all fantastic. This is the same as the world of Facebook or Instagram. Everybody is happy and everybody is on vacation all the time. Well, the reality is not that. The reality is that we run into problems, we have issues, and the key, and I think that the strength of an organization is not to avoid issues, but actually to face them and overcome them rather than claim that they don't exist. So I try my best, and I will continue to try in any other questions to tell you the truth, the way it is, what works and what doesn't. And the reason is because the only way I learn is by stating, listen, I have an issue, I have a problem. Does anybody has an idea? And many times people have ideas. Great. I don't need to claim that I'm the smartest person in the room because A, I'm not, and B, I will never learn anything.
I think there's a saying, the degree of success in a narrative usually is in inverse relationship to the actual success. So we have to be skeptical about what we hear about success stories in general, although.
But if you're about those statements, I will give one that my mother used to say, which is something that I use quite often, which is, we are born with 2 ears and 1 mouth, use the ratio.
That's a funny one. Hey, so Tsvi, I got a few tangentially related questions. I'm going to staple them into one because they just came in, I'm using my judgment to see why they can be clubbed together. So they are all around HR related matters. They're about HR issues we often see with organizational attempts to become more agile, more adaptive, more nimble, and more specifically with empowering teams and passing on autonomy and sovereignty and purpose onto teams. Specifically, individual performance appraisals, bonuses, promotions, career path. That's one of the earlier submitted questions, and a few that just followed live. If you could tell more about how performance assessments and promotions were done in the environment where it's still a fintech experience that you're sharing, and we all understand how, what governs, what drives fintech culture. So it's kind of all together. So how did you handle this? Or was it not organization wide? Maybe it was locally sustained, maybe ring fence. I don't want to lead on with these suggestions, but tell us how it was.
So let's just start with the statement that we have a saying, especially in financial services, that audit and compliance, the regulators are normally 3 to 5 years behind technology. So if there's something is happening, in about 5 years they'll understand it. It happened the same with cloud. It happened with other things. I mean, up until recently, they still look at cloud as a traditional outsourcing, and we had to explain no. By the way, similarly with agile, I'm starting with this for a reason. I'll get to HR in a minute. One of the difficulties in explaining what DevOps is to the auditors is that they claim, and by the way, rightly so, that for many, many years we taught them about ITIL, and in ITIL you have the clear separation of development from testing, from QA, from production, and different people, different separation, and now we're telling them, forget about it, it's all together. So it's very hard for them to understand, and one of the things that we try to do in this regards is to ensure that we are not saying that we are removing the guardrails. All we are saying is we are automating the guardrails. And we use some example when you have this huge meeting on Friday, when just before we make changes, and someone explains the change, and I basically called on the head of internal audit, and I told him, how many people do you think in the meeting really understand what this person just said? Do they really understand the consequences, not the first one, but the second and third level consequences of the change to be able to make this decision? And my answer was, they normally don't, but if you automate it, then the likelihood is that you'll be more successful in preventing errors than if you actually let people do it. Switching to HR, so if regulators and auditors are 3 to 5 years behind, and HR is probably 10 years behind. This was basically what I was trying to say. So it is very hard for HR to understand the change in the operating model and the change or the shift in power of the people, because at the end of the day, what they're saying is, I need to have a name of a person that is the one that does the reviews by the end of the year, and is the one that decides how much money or bonus, especially in financial services, where bonus is a very large part of your income, people will get. So I don't care about your squads and fleets and tribes and I don't even care. Give me a name of a person who is the manager, and he's the one that is going to make those decisions. So it was a very, very long, and it's still an ongoing process to switch from this to another model in which basically the squad decides on the performance of the squad members. And in the squad, you have the members that are from the same chapter, but they could be from others. And you have people from the business, you have other people involved in the decision. Now, there's someone that coordinates that, and that's normally the squad lead or the fleet lead, etc. But unlike the manager that is the ultimate decision maker and say, I'm the one that makes the decision, and thank you for your input, I may or may not take it, the role of the lead there is to summarize the feeling of all the members and come back with a recommendation of such. Now, depending on the group, some groups are more advanced, some are less. Some basically refer to the squad leads or the fleet lead as you coordinated and you provide the recommendation outside, and we trust you that you're doing it on behalf of all of us. The ones that are actually more daring was saying, you know what? Once we have all of those recommendations summarized by the lead, bring them to the group as a group. Let us all understand and know what is being said on each and every one of us. So the lead itself can say, you know what? Of course, people sometimes disagree.
Yes.
People may say, people are saying I'm not.
Okay, thank you.
Wait. People saying that I don't, and I do. There are a lot of those arguments that are going on, but at the end of the day, we are trying to let the team make this determination. HR is very hard to accept it, but at the end of the day, in the teams that actually started to go this way, we have seen better success. And by the way, some kind of awakening moment for some members that were told along the way that they are not performing to the level, but they never really got it. When everybody around the team, around the table said, guys, you're not doing what you're supposed to do, suddenly or finally it got on them. So again, it will take time. Have no illusions, especially with HR that needs a number. I need to know if you're performing at level 1 or level 5 or level 3. I mean, give me a number. I don't care if you're doing okay, whatever. Give me a number. I need to know how much money I need to pay Jane Doe. So this is a process, and it takes a while. But I think that there is hope there, because the teams that actually try to assume this responsibility, again, with the exception of the people that were not rated so well, liked it. They liked it as such. And many times, this actually allowed people to realize that many times, the effort is a team effort and not an individual effort. And sometimes then the entire team decided, all of us did well, all of us should be basically paid proportionally the same, because we all did well, and or we didn't do well, and still we all should be the same because it was a team effort rather than a specific person that was outshining everybody else, or the other way around, underperforming. So it's a process, and I cannot give you a formula of success. I can tell you that over time and many iterations, this actually could get better.
Thank you, Tzvi. I'm actually looking at the clock. We got T minus 3 before we have to wrap. On this specific topic, I really want to thank you for addressing, because you probably killed a bunch of birds with one stone, and especially there's so many questions that are being raised about HR-related matters. You very candidly shared some of your sentiments about how HR positions itself and what degree of knowledge and education and experience they have, and how it is important not to leave HR and finance, those other areas where they're often left behind of agile transformations. And we're just going to check the box on IT side. We're going to leave the rest of the organizational behind. So in fact, there's so many experiments documented in large-scale Scrum on this. This is just a side note. So I'm happy you brought this up. So we got 2 more minutes before we have to wrap. There's some other questions that I will probably summarize and put them up somewhere, either on the meetup, or maybe I'll kind of disseminate those in some other way. Any wrapping statements from you? Anything you would like to share before we all?
Yeah, I would say, as I started with it, and it's not news to all of you that are, participating and doing it. It's a journey. It's a long journey, and along the journey there will be bumps along the way. There will be issues. There will be mistakes. There will be failures. Don't expect to get it right the first time. It will never happen. But as long as you believe, and that's really the key. If you believe at the end tail, if you believe that at the end of the day you're doing well, you're doing good, you're really trying to make people's life better, both your client and your developers and everybody else, it's doable. I mean, the rest, we learn as we go, but don't lose faith. That's my point. There will be bumps along the way, but don't lose faith.
And don't copy paste, right?
And copy paste, yeah.
don't rent. Own your own ideas and decisions.
Absolutely. Don't try to do what someone else is doing, because listen, if it works fantastically for the names that you know and you hear, ING, Spotify, Capital One, etc., it's great, and I'm very happy for them. Don't assume that if you copy it, it will work for you. Every organization is unique. What works for you is something that you need to learn and adopt your way.
I think it's a very important message and important recommendation, because sometimes these very unique, very specific to one organization experiments are being amplified and almost copy pasted and force fed, and they're being amplified by consultancies that could just come in and try to unwrap and install. And that's something important to understand. Okay, we're at the hour, and before we wrap, I want everyone to be. So I would like to thank everyone for joining. But even more importantly, Tsvi, I would like to thank you for making this a very entertaining and very informative hour for everyone, making this so live and so unscripted. And I think I like the fact that it was deck free. We did not do what's called a DDT, deck driven transformation. It was not a presentation, right? So anything that people want to ask offline, they certainly can drop me a note, and I'll see if I can maybe get your answers specifically based on your experiences back to those people that have asked. And please be on the lookout, everyone, for some other upcoming events. Hopefully we can bring maybe Tsvi back again. And thank you all for joining. I think it was a very good turnout. In fact, we have more than 50% people showing up on the virtual event, which is a pretty significant number.
Right.
I hate
Thanks, everyone.
that are meaningless, but this is a pretty meaningful one.
All right. Thanks, everyone. Bye-bye.
Everyone, cheers.